out of all the great mysteries from the long and storied history of the Imperium of Man, one of the most long-standing concerns the fate of two of the Primarchs, the genetically engineered sons of the Emperor of Mankind. Specifically, the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions. In regards to the actions of the Primarchs prior to the Horus Heresy, here is what we know with definite certainty. The Emperor created the 20 Primarchs prior to the launch of the Great Crusade. The incubation capsules containing the infant Primarchs were sucked into a great warp rift and scattered across the galaxy. Each Primarch would land on a human-inhabited world, and, with the exception of Conrad Kurz, who was entirely alone during his childhood and adolescence, would be adopted by various human parents, or in Angron's case, a slave master, and that over the course of the Great Crusade, the Emperor would be reunited with each of the various Primarchs, who in turn would eventually lead their respective legions created from their genetic stock. Officially, the Primarchs were rediscovered in the following order: Horus, Leman Russ, one of the missing Primarchs, Ferrus Manus, Fulgrim, Vulcan, Rogal Dawn, Roboute Guilliman, Magnus the Red, Sanguinius, Lionel Johnson, Perturabo, Mortarion, Lorgar, Jagatai Khan, Conrad Kurz, Angron, Corax, the second lost Primarch, and finally Alfarius. However, this in itself isn't without its flaws. According to the novel Deliverance Lost, the lost Primarchs met their ultimate fate prior to Corvus Corax being reunited with the Emperor of Mankind. That being said, the order of rediscovery is not necessarily the order of when they rejoin the Emperor. So who could the lost Primarchs have been? One of the most popular candidates for an identity to one of the lost Primarchs is a hero from Warhammer Fantasy, Sigmar Heldenhammer. This is due to the following reasons. Sigmar was a large, strong, charismatic and intelligent leader who would unite all the human tribes in his vicinity into an empire, very similar to the backstories of many of the other Primarchs. In addition, Sigmar was said to have been heralded by the arrival of a twin-tailed comet, which some have interpreted as being his gestation capsule entering the Warhammer world's atmosphere before landing, like a comet from the sky. Sigmar would also eventually disappear into the unknown, which some have attributed being due to Sigmar being reunited with the Emperor of Mankind. However, despite this popular fan theory, this is simply not possible. Sigmar himself was confirmed to have been born to normal human parents and did not fall from the sky. And later on, in the timeline of Warhammer Fantasy, Sigmar did return as a fully fledged god. As such, there is no way Sigmar himself can be a Primarch. Another potential identity for one of the lost Primarchs comes from the book Into the Maelstrom, within the story Hell in a Bottle. This story details a character called Primarch Rubenek of the Iron Hearts. This story is the sole mention of Rubenek, let alone mentioning him as a Primarch. Now, there is always the possibility that the author of the story confused the position of Primarch with Chapter Master, a rank given to the commanders of modern-day Space Marine chapters. The two Primarchs had their names and the names of their legions expunged from the annals of Imperial history by the Emperor himself, as if the 2nd and 11th Primarchs never existed. However, some sources also less ambiguously state that these records were deleted following the events of the Horus Heresy. Thanks to the events of the Horus Heresy novel series, we know that the 2nd and 11th Primarchs met their ultimate fate prior to the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, as they and their fates are referenced a few times during the events leading up to and during the Horus Heresy. In Descent of Angels, which takes place around the same time Lionel Johnson was discovered, the Legion librarian Israfel tells the initiate Zahariel El-Zurius the history of Old Night, and during the course of the story informs Zahariel that Lionel Johnson has 19 brothers, which proves that the lost Primarchs had themselves not committed whatever transgression resulting in their erasure from history. In the novel Unremembered Empire, Roboute, Guilliman and Lionel Johnson enter a chamber within Guilliman's palace on the crag that features a great table and 21 chairs, one for the Emperor and one for each of the Primarchs. Each chair was decorated with a banner representing either Terra or each of the Space Marine legions, except two, which have been left as plain scraps of cloth. When Lionel Johnson muses that the Lost Brothers will never return, Guilliman says in response,
"Yet their absence must be marked. Places must be left for them. That is simply honor."
And also, prior to the outbreak of the Horus Heresy itself, statues of the 20 Primarchs had been erected within the Imperial Palace on Terra. But by the time the Horus Heresy broke out, the plinths for the 2nd and 11th Primarch had apparently been empty for a long time, and that no one ever spoke of those absent brothers, or their separate fates. So since we are still at a loss to the identities of the lost Primarchs, could we still have some clue as to their ultimate fate? Some have speculated that the reason the lost Primarchs were erased from history was due to them betraying the Emperor of Mankind. The 2nd edition Ultramarine Codex flatly states that it seems likely that the 2nd and 11th Legions fought for Horus at least during the beginning of the heresy. However, this particular piece of information has since been retconned, as during the events of the First Heretic, the Primarchs Lorgar and Magnus the Red discussed the fates of the lost Primarchs 43 standard years prior to the events of the Istvan drop site massacre. But the idea of the lost legions having been traitors and then wiped from history as punishment still holds some degree of merit. The novel Outcast Dead states that in regards to the Thousand Sons breaking the Edict of Nicaea, the wolves will be loosed again, making reference to, presumably, the Space Wolves Legion, and Leman Russ's unofficial role as the Emperor's executioner. During the events of Prospero Burns, Leman Russ also muses that this would not be the first time the Wolves have been called to battle other Space Marine legions. While this could be referencing the Space Wolves having been called to fight or destroy one or both of the Lost Legions, this could however be a reference to the Night of the Wolf, when the Space Wolves battled the World Eaters Legion, or even the conflict between Russ and Lionel Johnson. There is also Horus Heresy Book 2, Massacre, which lists two events in 965 and 969 M30 as all data redacted, but still lists the Space Wolf Legion as taking part in these events, which could very well be Leman Russ exercising his role of the Emperor's executioner against the 2nd and 11th Legions. The traitor possibility is also supported by the story The Crimson Fist, where the Imperial Fist First Captain Sigismund states upon seeing the shrouded statues of the lost Primarchs that they are traitors and their statues should be torn down. The First Heretic also refers to the missing Primarchs as the Forgotten and the Purged. This could be simply a way of describing traitors, but these terms could also be specific references to the individual legions, that one became the Forgotten and the other became the Purged. The problem with the traitor theory, however, comes with the events of the Horus Heresy itself. During the events of the Horus Heresy, half of the Primarchs turned against the Emperor and sided with the traitorous War Master, Horus Lupercal, the Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, Iron Warriors, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, the Word Bearers, the Night Lords, the Thousand Sons, and the Alpha Legion, all turning against the Emperor. While hidden from most members of the Administratum, the records of these traitor legions still exist to be accessed by those with a high enough clearance. Although given how the Emperor himself personally expunged the 2nd and 11th Primarchs from Imperial records, this could simply mean that only the Emperor had the necessary clearance to perform such an action. But again, there is a problem with this theory. In the novel Dark Imperium, which takes place after the Primarch Roboute Guilliman was restored to life and retook his role as Lord Commander of the Imperium following the Ultramar Crusade, Guilliman states the following to the ecclesiastical priest Frater Mathieu.
"I was one of 20. 2 failed. Half the rest turned on my father. The Emperor is not infallible. Nor am I.
This suggests that the Lost Primarchs did not betray the Emperor in any circumstance. So how did the 2nd and 11th Primarch fail? One possibility is that they and their legions fell to mutation and physical degradation. This is somewhat hinted at in the novel Fear to Tread. In the prologue of the novel, the Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius is called to deal with a battle brother named Alatros, who succumbed to the Legion's genetic flaw, the Red Thirst. The Red Thirst manifests itself within battle brothers of the Blood Angels as an unnatural craving for fresh blood. Alatros attacks Sanguinius in an attempt to quench his bloodlust, but Horus witnesses Sanguinius kill Alatros. When Horus asked why Sanguinius killed one of his own men, Sanguinius is hesitant to answer, but reveals the existence of the Red Thirst. When Horus asks Sanguinius why he never talked about this with the other Primarchs, or why he never asked the Emperor for help in this regard, Sanguinius replies with the following:
"You know the reason. I will not be responsible for the erasure of the Blood Angels from Imperial history. I will not have a third empty plinth beneath the roof of the Hegemon as my Legion's only memorial."
This response implies that the Legions were purged because of an inherent flaw in their gene seed, and as a result, Sanguinius fears the same fate would befall him and his Legion should knowledge of the Red Thirst ever become public knowledge. A major flaw in the gene seed, resulting in degradation and corruption of the Primarchs themselves, could potentially shame the Emperor to the point of erasing his mistakes from history, especially given how the Emperor viewed the Primarchs as little more than tools and weapons of war. However, the main flaw in this possibility is that the Thousand Sons Legion also suffered a major flaw with their gene seed, with the curse of the flesh change, causing vast physical deformities to the warriors of the Legion. And while they were greatly reduced in number compared to the other legions, they were still an active legion. This is also supported by a quote from the Magus Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Belisarius Call, when his request to use the gene stock of not only the 9 traitor legions, but the 2 lost legions as well in his experiments with the newly created Primaris Marines is denied by Roboute Guilliman.
The warriors were not at fault. The science is not at fault. Their Primarchs were. Chapters from your gene line have also fallen in the past millennia, Lord Regent, and we do not censor them.
Not only does this confirm that the gene seed of the 2nd and 11th Primarch still exists, but still exists in a pure enough state to be used to found new chapters. Another tragic possibility that exists is that the 2nd and 11th Primarch simply died during the Great Crusade in the various wars against a multitude of Xenos races, in the Emperor's quest of reuniting the fractured remnants of mankind into his Imperium. Within Horus Heresy Book 7, Inferno, it mentions a campaign against a Xenos race known as the Rangdan Cerebrvores. The campaign against the Rangdan Cerebrvores was said to be the single most brutal action of xenocide during the entirety of the Great Crusade, stating that entire worlds, fleets, and Titan legions were utterly destroyed, and that, quote, entire Space Marine legions, section redacted, lost to the Imperium, and that specific details of the conflict are kept sealed away within the Vaults of Terror. Given the sheer scale of devastation inflicted upon Imperial forces, with additional reports of the Dark Angels Legion losing over 50,000 battle brothers, it seems a strong possibility that the 2nd and 11th Primarchs were killed during the conflict against these Xenos creatures, and with their deaths during the Great Crusade, it would have been viewed as having failed the Imperium, and in their deaths, having failed the Emperor and the Imperium as a whole, could have had their names stricken from history, for the Emperor would have viewed them as flawed creations. This would also explain as to why the Ultramarines Legion had swelled massively in number around the time the 2nd and 11th Legions were expunged from Imperial records, for the surviving warriors of the Legions would have been incorporated into the Ultramarines, so that they would continue fighting for the Imperium and the Emperor. The reason they were incorporated into the Ultramarines specifically, however, is unknown, although it could be due to a bond of honour or friendship between Roboute Guilliman and the lost Primarchs. Another, albeit outlandish possibility, is that one of these lost Primarchs is somehow linked to the minor chaos god Malice, specifically the 11th Primarch, due to the number 11 being the sacred number of Malice, and that Malice is also known as the Lost God, in a similar way as to the 2nd and 11th Primarchs being referred to as the Lost Primarchs. Now admittedly, while an interesting thing to note, it seems somewhat unlikely. The final possibility is that the Lost Primarchs were in fact assassinated. Click the link in the video description for that particular theory video. However, we will never know for certain the fates of these two mysterious figures from the Imperium's past. Ultimately, in real world terms, the reason for the missing Primarchs is to allow players to forge their own narratives, and create their own stories and legions. So tell us about your stories for the Lost Primarchs in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.